The whisper caught in her throat like a bird trapped in a cage, and Beatrice Porter's hand trembled so violently that the flour canister slipped from her grasp and clattered against the wooden counter of the general store. The sound echoed through the quiet afternoon, and she froze, her entire body rigid with a fear so deeply ingrained that it had become as natural as breathing. The woman behind her had asked a simple question, nothing more than polite conversation in the small mining town of St. Elmo, Colorado in the summer of 1876, but the inquiry had required her to speak the name she had trained herself never to utter aloud. Her husband's name. Even the thought of forming those syllables made her stomach twist with a terror that had ruled her life for 3 long years. "Mrs. Porter, are you quite all right?" The shopkeeper, Mrs. Henderson, peered at her with concern etched across her weathered face. "You have gone pale as a ghost." Beatrice managed a weak nod, her fingers clutching the edge of the counter for support. She could not explain that speaking his name felt like summoning a demon, like calling forth the very devil himself to appear in a cloud of sulfur and rage. Even here, 200 miles from the ranch where she had left him, the fear followed her like a shadow. She had learned early in their marriage that to speak his name was to invite his attention, and his attention inevitably led to pain. So she had taught herself to refer to him only as my husband or he, or sometimes not at all, letting sentences trail into silence rather than risk the utterance. "I am fine," she said quietly, though her voice betrayed the lie. "Just a moment of weakness from the altitude." St. Elmo sat at nearly 10,000 feet, nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains that touched the sky. The thin air affected newcomers, and Beatrice had arrived only 3 weeks prior, seeking refuge in the boarding house run by a distant cousin she barely remembered from childhood. The town thrived on silver mining, and the population had swelled to nearly 2,000 souls, all chasing dreams of fortune in the rocky earth. The streets bustled with activity, miners and merchants and families trying to carve out lives in this harsh but beautiful landscape. Beatrice gathered her purchases with shaking hands and hurried from the store, keeping her head down as she navigated the crowded Main Street. She had become skilled at making herself invisible, at moving through the world without drawing notice. Her brown hair was always pulled back severely, her dresses plain and dark, her movements quick and efficient. Nothing to attract attention, nothing to provoke anger. She did not see the cowboy until she collided directly with him. The impact sent her stumbling backward, and strong hands caught her arms, steadying her before she could fall. She gasped and jerked away instinctively, her parcels scattering across the dusty street. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she kept her eyes down, bracing for the inevitable shout, the rough shake, the accusations that would follow. "Madam, I apologize," a deep voice said, surprisingly gentle. "I was not watching where I was going. Please, let me help you with your things." Beatrice dared a glance upward and found herself looking into the kindest pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and when he smiled apologetically, the expression reached all the way to those remarkable eyes. "No harm done," she managed to whisper, already bending to retrieve her scattered goods. "I should have been more careful." "The fault was mine entirely," he insisted, kneeling beside her to gather the packages. "I just rode into town and I am afraid my mind was elsewhere. Are you hurt?" "No, I am perfectly well." She took the parcels he handed her, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Thank you for your assistance." She started to move away, but his voice stopped her. "I am Theodore Dalton. Most folks call me Theo. I just hired on at the Silver Creek Ranch working cattle." Beatrice knew she should simply nod and continue on her way, but something in his open, honest expression made her pause. "Beatrice Porter," she said softly, then immediately regretted giving her name at all. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Porter." He tipped his hat respectfully, noting the thin gold band on her finger. "I hope to see you around town." She hurried away without responding, her heart still racing but for reasons she could not quite identify. When she glanced back from the corner, she found him still standing where she had left him, watching her with an expression of curiosity mixed with concern. The boarding house where Beatrice lived occupied a large Victorian structure on the edge of town, painted a cheerful yellow that seemed at odds with the rough mining community. Her cousin, Margaret, had married a successful assayer, and they had converted their home to take-in boarders when the mining boom brought more people than housing. Beatrice occupied a small room on the second floor, barely large enough for a bed and washstand, but it was hers and hers alone, and that made it precious beyond measure. She spent the evening mending clothes by lamplight, her needle moving in steady, practiced strokes. The work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, though she found her thoughts drifting back to the cowboy with the gray eyes. Theodore Dalton. She tested the name silently, feeling the shape of it in her mind. He had been kind, and kindness from a man was so foreign to her experience that she hardly knew how to process it. A knock at her door made her jump, and she pricked her finger with the needle. "Yes, Beatrice, dear, may I come in?" Margaret's voice filtered through the thin wood. "Of course." Beatrice set aside her mending and opened the door to admit her cousin. Margaret was a plump, cheerful woman of 35 with graying hair and a perpetually worried expression when she looked at Beatrice. She had asked few questions when Beatrice appeared on her doorstep 3 weeks ago with nothing but a carpetbag and terror in her eyes, but the unspoken inquiry hung between them constantly. "I wanted to check on you," Margaret said, settling onto the edge of the narrow bed. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you seemed unwell at the store today." "The altitude affects me still," Beatrice said, returning to her chair. "Beatrice." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "You have been here nearly a month, and I have watched you jump at every sound and flinch from every shadow. I know you are running from something or someone. You do not have to tell me the details, but I need to know if you are in danger, if he might come looking for you." The question hung in the air like smoke. Beatrice's fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt, and for a long moment she could not speak. Finally, she forced the words out. "He does not know where I am. I waited until he was away on business, and I took the money I had saved and I left. I do not think he will search for me. I was not important enough to him for that effort." "But you are terrified of him finding you," Margaret observed. "Yes." The admission was barely audible. "If he found me, he would kill me. Not quickly, but he would kill me nonetheless." Margaret reached across and squeezed her hand. "Then we will make certain he does not find you. You are safe here, cousin. St. Elmo is far from everywhere, and we look after our own." After Margaret left, Beatrice lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. She thought about the cowboy again, about the concern in his eyes when she had pulled away from him. She wondered what it would be like to live without fear, to speak freely, to not measure every word and action against the possibility of violence. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the mountain air crisp with the promise of autumn approaching. Beatrice had secured a position helping at the town's small school, assisting the teacher with the younger children and handling administrative tasks. The work was simple but satisfying, and it gave her a purpose beyond mere survival. She was walking to the schoolhouse when she encountered Theodore Dalton again. He was leading his horse to the livery, and he smiled when he spotted her. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter," he called out. "I hope this day finds you well." "Good morning, Mr. Dalton." She kept her voice neutral, polite, but not encouraging. "I wonder if I might walk with you a moment," he said, falling into step beside her while leading his horse. "I am still learning my way around town, and I could use some direction." She hesitated, then nodded. "I am heading to the schoolhouse. I work there. A teacher." Interest lit his features. "An assistant only. I help with the small children." They walked in silence for a few moments, and Beatrice found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. He moved with an easy confidence, unhurried and relaxed in a way that seemed impossible to her. She had forgotten that people could exist without constant vigilance. "I hope you will forgive me for being forward, Mrs. Porter," Theo said carefully, "but I noticed yesterday that you seemed frightened when I steadied you. I want you to know that I meant no disrespect, and I would never wish to cause you distress." Beatrice stopped walking and stared at him in surprise. No one had ever acknowledged her fear so directly, let alone apologized for inadvertently triggering it. Thank you. I am not accustomed to unexpected contact." "I understand." His gray eyes were serious. "I have known women who carried fear like you do. My own mother lived that way for years before my father died. I recognize the signs." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the armor she had built around herself. "I should continue to the school," she said softly. "I cannot be late." "Of course. I hope I will see you around town, Mrs. Porter. If you ever need anything at all, please know you can ask. I work at Silver Creek Ranch, just 2 miles north of town." She nodded and hurried away, her mind spinning. He had known. He had looked at her and seen the truth she tried so desperately to hide, and instead of taking advantage or dismissing her, he had offered help. The kindness was almost painful in its unexpectedness. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Beatrice worked at the school each morning and afternoon, helped Margaret with the boarding house chores in the evening, and spent her spare time sewing or reading. St. Elmo was proving to be a sanctuary, the busy mining town providing both anonymity and community in equal measure. She began to recognize faces, to exchange greetings with shopkeepers, to feel the first tentative threads of belonging, and she kept encountering Theodore Dalton. He seemed to appear wherever she went, always polite and respectful, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. He would tip his hat as she passed, or hold a door open, or offer a genuine smile that never demanded anything in return. Slowly, incrementally, she found herself relaxing in his presence. One Saturday afternoon, nearly 2 months after her arrival in St. Elmo, Beatrice was shopping for thread when she heard raised voices from outside the general store. Through the window, she could see a crowd gathering in the street, and her instinct was to shrink back, to hide until whatever commotion passed. But curiosity won out, and she edged closer to see what was happening. 2 men were arguing, their voices growing louder and more heated. One was a miner she recognized from the boarding house, a rough man named Jack Sullivan who had a reputation for drinking and fighting. The other was Theodore Dalton, standing with his hands loose at his sides, his expression calm but alert. "You cheated me," Sullivan was shouting, his face red with anger and whiskey. "That horse you sold me is lame, and you knew it." "I sold you no horse," Theo said evenly. "You have me confused with someone else, friend. I just arrived in St. Elmo 2 months ago, and I have sold nothing to anyone." "You calling me a liar?" Sullivan's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. The crowd murmured nervously, people backing away from the potential violence. Beatrice felt her breath catch, her body going cold with familiar fear. She had seen men fight before, had witnessed the terrible damage they could inflict when anger took control. But Theo remained utterly calm. "I am saying you are mistaken. Why don't you tell me what this horse looks like, and maybe we can figure out who actually sold it to you?" The reasonableness of the question seemed to penetrate Sullivan's drunken rage. He blinked, swaying slightly on his feet. "Big bay gelding," he said slowly. "White blaze on the face." "I ride a sorrel mare," Theo said patiently. "You can check at the livery. I have never owned a bay gelding." "Was the man you bought from tall like me?" "No," Sullivan admitted. "Shorter, stocky." "That sounds like Bill Morrison," someone in the crowd called out. "He sold a bay gelding last week and left town right after." Understanding dawned on Sullivan's face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "Hell, I apologize, Dalton. I had you mixed up with someone else." "No harm done," Theo said easily, extending his hand. "We all make mistakes." Sullivan shook his hand, then stumbled off toward the nearest saloon, muttering apologies. The crowd dispersed, and Beatrice found herself standing alone on the boardwalk, staring at the cowboy, who had just diffused a potentially deadly situation with nothing but calm reason. Theo noticed her watching and walked over, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Exciting afternoon in St. Elmo," he said. "You could have been shot," Beatrice said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "He was drunk and angry and you just stood there. Running would have made it worse," Theo explained. "Men like Sullivan are more scared than dangerous, especially when they have been drinking. He just needed someone to listen to him and help him see reason. But what if you had been wrong? What if he had drawn his gun? Then I would have dealt with it." His expression grew more serious. "I have been in worse situations, Mrs. Porter. I learned a long time ago that staying calm is the best way to survive most confrontations." They stood together on the boardwalk, and Beatrice realized she was shaking. Not from fear of Theo, but from the memory of all the times her husband had exploded into violence over imagined slights or simple mistakes. The contrast between the two men was so stark it was almost painful. "Would you like to sit down?" Theo asked gently, gesturing to a bench outside the store. "You look a bit pale." She nodded and let him guide her to the bench, though she was careful to leave proper space between them. He did not try to sit too close, respecting her boundaries even in his concern. "I am sorry if that upset you," he said. "Sometimes men are fools, especially when they have been drinking." "My husband drinks," Beatrice heard herself say, then immediately regretted the admission. She never spoke about him, never gave voice to the reality of her marriage. Theo was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Is that why you came to St. Elmo? To get away from him?" She should deny it. She should stand up and walk away and maintain the careful fiction that she was simply a woman whose husband was away on business. But something about Theo's steady presence, his calm acceptance, made her want to be honest. "Yes," she whispered. "I ran away. I saved money for 2 years, hiding coins in a jar buried in the garden, and when he went to Denver on business, I took that money and I left. I have not spoken to him since. Does he know where you are?" "No, at least I do not believe so. I told no one where I was going." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I am too frightened to even say his name aloud. It is foolish, I know. He is not here. He cannot hear me. But I cannot make myself do it." "It is not foolish," Theo said firmly. "Fear like that does not come from nothing. It comes from experience, from knowing what a person is capable of. You have every right to your caution." Beatrice looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw understanding in his eyes. "You said your mother lived with fear. What happened to her?" "My father was a violent man, especially when he drank. He would rage over nothing, break things, hit her." My older brother and I tried to protect her when we were old enough, but it only made things worse for everyone. Then one day when I was 15, my father got drunk and picked a fight with the wrong man. He was shot and killed in the street. I cannot say I mourned him. My mother lived another 20 years in peace before she passed. I am sorry, Beatrice said softly. Do not be. I am only sorry that she suffered for so long before finding freedom. He turned to face her more fully. Mrs. Porter, I want you to know that you are safe here. And if your husband ever does find you, there are people in this town who would stand with you, myself included. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. She had been alone for so long, carrying her fear and her secrets with no one to share the burden. To have someone see her pain and offer protection without demanding anything in return was almost more than she could bear. Why would you do that? She asked. You barely know me. Because it is the right thing to do, Theo said simply. And because I see you struggling under a weight you should not have to carry alone. Everyone deserves to live without fear, Mrs. Porter. Everyone deserves kindness and safety. Those are not things you should have to earn. She wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed by her emotion. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. That means more to me than you can know. Call me Theo, he said with a gentle smile. And perhaps, if you are comfortable with it, I could call you Beatrice. The use of her first name should have felt presumptuous, but instead it felt like recognition, like being seen as a person rather than merely as someone's wife. I would like that, she said quietly. They sat together for a while longer, watching the afternoon activity of St. Elmo flow around them. For the first time in years, Beatrice felt something other than fear when sitting beside a man. She felt safe. The friendship that developed between Beatrice and Theo over the following weeks was unlike anything she had experienced before. He made no demands on her time or attention, but he was always there when she needed him. He carried her heavy packages from the store without being asked. He walked her home when evening fell early as autumn deepened into winter. He listened when she talked and respected her silence when she did not. Most importantly, he never pushed her to share more than she was ready to give. They fell into a routine of taking Sunday afternoon walks together when the weather permitted. Theo would call at the boarding house after church, and they would stroll through the town or follow one of the many trails that wound through the mountains surrounding St. Elmo. On these walks, Beatrice slowly began to open up about her life. She told him about growing up in a small farming community in Kansas, the youngest of 6 children. She described how she had met her husband at a church social when she was 18, how charming he had seemed at first, how attentive and kind. She explained that the violence started small, a harsh word here, a rough grip there, and escalated so gradually that she hardly noticed until she was trapped. I thought it was my fault, she admitted one crisp November afternoon as they walked along the river that ran through town. He would tell me I provoked him, that I was too stupid or too careless, and I believed him. It took me a long time to understand that nothing I did or did not do excused what he did to me. It was never your fault, Theo said firmly. No matter what he told you, violence is always a choice. He chose to hurt you rather than control his temper. That is on him, not you. She appreciated his certainty, the way he spoke the truth she was still learning to believe. With Theo, she felt her perspective slowly shifting, the distorted reality her husband had created gradually giving way to a clearer understanding of what a relationship should be. Theo shared his own stories too. He talked about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about learning to work cattle and break horses from his mother's brother, who took him and his brother in after their father died. He described the years he spent drifting from ranch to ranch, working as a cowboy throughout Colorado and Montana, never quite finding a place that felt like home. I came to St. Elmo because I heard Silver Creek Ranch was hiring, and I was ready to settle somewhere for a while, he explained. But I stayed because of you. The admission made Beatrice's heart skip. Because of me. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said, his gray eyes meeting hers steadily. And the more I got to know you, the more I wanted to stay. You are remarkable, Beatrice. You survived something terrible, you found the courage to leave, and you are building a new life from nothing. That takes strength most people never have to find. I do not feel strong, she confessed. I feel scared all the time. I wake up in the middle of the night certain I hear his footsteps, that he has found me. I cannot say his name without feeling like I will summon him like a demon. Fear does not mean you are not strong, Theo said gently. It means you understand danger. But you do not have to carry that fear alone anymore. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. As winter settled over St. Elmo, bringing snow that piled high in the streets and frosted the windows with ice, Beatrice found herself thinking about Theo constantly. She looked forward to their Sunday walks, to the conversations over coffee at the boarding house, to the quiet moments when they sat together in comfortable silence. He had become her closest friend, the person she trusted most in the world, and somewhere along the way, her feelings had deepened into something more. She was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her. She was still married, still bound by law and convention to a man she had fled. Even if she were free, she did not know if she could give Theo what he deserved. Her husband had broken something in her, had twisted her understanding of intimacy and affection into something fearful and painful. She did not know if she could ever be the kind of wife a good man like Theo should have. But despite her fears, the feelings grew stronger with each passing day. It was Margaret who finally forced the conversation. One evening in mid-December, after Theo had left from another visit, her cousin sat down across from Beatrice at the kitchen table. "That young man is in love with you," Margaret said without preamble, Beatrice's hand stilled on the mending in her lap. "I know," she whispered. "And unless I miss my guess, you feel the same way about him." "I am married, Margaret. Whatever I feel does not matter." "You are married to a monster who beat you," Margaret said bluntly. "That is not the same as having a real marriage. Have you considered seeking a divorce?" The word hung in the air between them. Divorce was scandalous, socially devastating, and legally complex. But it was possible, especially in the Western territories where women had slightly more legal standing than back east. "On what grounds?" Beatrice asked. "I have no proof of what he did." "No witnesses. Just my word against his, and he is a respected businessman in Denver. You could claim abandonment. You have been separated for months now. He would fight it. He would come here and—" "I cannot risk it, Margaret. I cannot risk him finding me." Her cousin sighed. "Then what will you do? Keep Theo at arm's length forever? Deny yourself happiness because of a man who does not deserve your loyalty?" "I do not know," Beatrice admitted. "I only know that I am not free, and until I am, I cannot ask Theo to wait for something that may never be possible." But fate, as it often did, made the decision for her. It was a bitter cold morning in January of 1877 when the telegram arrived. Margaret brought it to Beatrice at the school, her face pale and serious. Beatrice opened it with shaking hands, dread pooling in her stomach. The message was brief. Her husband, Robert Porter, had been killed in Denver 3 weeks prior. A business dispute had turned violent and he had been shot. The body had been buried and the estate was being settled. As his widow, she was entitled to his property and assets. Beatrice read the telegram 3 times, unable to process the words. He was dead. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had controlled her every waking moment for years, was gone. She should feel relief, joy, freedom. Instead, she felt numb. "Beatrice," Margaret touched her arm gently. "Are you all right?" "He is dead," she said flatly. "Robert is dead." Margaret pulled her into a tight embrace, and Beatrice stood frozen in her cousin's arms, waiting for the emotion to come. But she felt nothing except a strange emptiness where the fear had lived for so long. She went through the rest of the day in a daze, performing her duties at the school mechanically, answering questions she did not hear, smiling when expected. When Theo appeared at the school that afternoon, clearly having heard the news from Margaret, she let him guide her outside into the cold winter air. "Talk to me," he said gently, his hands resting on her shoulders as they stood in the sheltered space behind the schoolhouse. "Tell me what you are feeling." "Nothing," Beatrice said. "I feel nothing at all. Should I not feel something? Relief, happiness. He is dead, Theo. I am free, but I just feel empty." "You are in shock," Theo explained. "You have lived with fear for so long that your mind does not know how to process its absence. The feelings will come, Beatrice. Give yourself time." "I can say his name now," she realized suddenly. "Robert Porter. He was my husband, and he beat me, and he made me afraid to speak his name aloud. But he is dead now, and he cannot hurt me anymore." She said it again, louder. "Robert Porter," and again. "Robert Porter." Her voice rose until she was nearly shouting it, years of repressed terror and rage pouring out in the repetition of a name. "Robert Porter. Robert Porter. He hurt me, and he terrified me, and he tried to break me, but he is dead, and I am alive, and I am free." She collapsed against Theo, sobbing now, the emotions finally breaking through the shock. He held her as she cried, his arms strong and steady around her, his voice murmuring comfort she could not quite hear over her own grief and relief and fury. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back and looked up at him through tear-swollen eyes. "I am free, Theo. For the first time in 6 years, I am truly free." "Yes," he said, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You are free, and you can build whatever life you want now. No one can stop you." "I want you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it is too soon. I know I should wait a proper mourning period, but I do not want to mourn him. I want to live, and I want to live with you if you will have me." Theo's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Beatrice Porter, I fell in love with you the first day I met you on that street. I have been yours since that moment. Whatever you want, whatever you need, I am here. For as long as you will have me. Forever," she said. "I want forever." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Beatrice leaned into the kiss, tasting freedom and hope and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. His lips were warm despite the cold air, his touch reverent rather than demanding. This was what a kiss should be, she realized. Not taking but sharing, not controlling but connecting. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Theo rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this at whatever pace you need," he promised. "I will not rush you, I will not push. We have all the time in the world now." The mourning period was a formality Beatrice observed more for propriety than genuine grief. She wore black for 3 months, though her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The estate settlement brought unexpected wealth. Robert had been more successful than she had realized, and as his widow, she inherited everything. The money gave her options, freedom beyond anything she had imagined. During those months, her relationship with Theo deepened in ways that had nothing to do with physical intimacy. They talked for hours, sharing dreams and fears and everyday observations. He made her laugh, something she had forgotten how to do. He introduced her to his friends at the ranch, good men who treated her with respect and welcomed her into their circle. He taught her to ride properly, patient with her nervousness around the large animals, celebrating when she finally cantered across an open field with wind in her hair and joy in her heart. Most importantly, he taught her what it meant to be treated as an equal. He asked her opinions and listened to her answers. He respected her decisions, even when he disagreed. He admitted when he was wrong and apologized when he hurt her feelings, however unintentionally. He showed her through 1,000 small actions that love was not about control or possession, but about partnership and mutual respect. In April, with wildflowers blooming across the mountain meadows and the snow finally melting from the high peaks, Theo asked her to marry him properly. They were sitting on a blanket beside a rushing creek, having ridden out from town for a picnic. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and Beatrice was laughing at something he had said when he grew serious. "I know I already told you I was yours," he said, taking her hand in his. "But I would like to make it official if you are ready. Beatrice Porter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She looked at him, this good man who had shown her what love should be, and felt her heart swell with emotion. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Theodore Dalton, I will marry you." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, nothing fancy but clearly chosen with care. "I know you already wear a ring," he said quietly, "but I wanted you to have one that represented something good, something chosen freely, not given in obligation." Beatrice slipped the ring Robert had given her from her finger and threw it as hard as she could into the rushing creek. It disappeared into the white water, carried away by the current. "That part of my life is over," she said firmly. "I want nothing from it." Theo slid the new ring onto her finger, and Beatrice stared at it, marveling at how different the weight felt. This ring was not a shackle but a promise. Not a brand of ownership, but a symbol of choice. They married in June in a simple ceremony at the small church in St. Elmo. Margaret and her husband stood as witnesses, along with several of Theo's friends from the ranch. Beatrice wore a cream-colored dress she had made herself, embroidered with delicate flowers. Theo wore his best suit, his dark hair freshly cut, his gray eyes shining with happiness. When the minister asked if she took Theodore Dalton to be her lawfully wedded husband, Beatrice said, "I do," in a clear, strong voice that carried through the church. And when Theo was asked the same question, his response was just as firm and certain. The kiss they shared after the minister pronounced them married was sweet and full of promise. The small congregation cheered, and Beatrice laughed, pure joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. She was married again, but this time to a man she had chosen freely, a man who saw her as a partner rather than property. They had a small reception at the boarding house, with cake and dancing and well wishes from the community that had embraced Beatrice as one of their own. As evening fell and the party wound down, Theo took her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Dalton?" he asked. Mrs. Dalton. The name felt right in a way Mrs. Porter never had. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." Theo had spent the past month fixing up a small cabin on the edge of town, making it perfect for them to start their married life together. It was simple but well built, with a large stone fireplace, windows that let in plenty of light, and a bedroom with a sturdy bed covered in a quilt Margaret had made as a wedding gift. As they stood in the main room of their new home, the evening light golden through the windows, Beatrice felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. She had been intimate with her husband, but those encounters had been marked by pain and fear, something to be endured rather than enjoyed. She did not know how to be with a man who actually cared about her comfort. Theo seemed to sense her anxiety. He took both her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said gently. This is our wedding night, but that does not obligate you to anything. We can just sleep if that is what you need." "I want to be with you," Beatrice said honestly. "I am just scared. My experience has not been good." "Then we will make new experiences," Theo promised. "Good ones. We will go slowly, and if you want to stop at any point, we stop. No questions, no anger. Your comfort matters more to me than anything else." He was true to his word. What followed was tender and patient, Theo attentive to every signal Beatrice gave, stopping when she tensed and waiting for her to relax before continuing. He murmured constant reassurance, telling her she was beautiful, that she was safe, that he loved her. For the first time in her life, Beatrice understood what intimacy could be when it was given freely between equals who cared for each other. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, she cried again. But these were tears of relief and gratitude rather than pain. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "For what?" His hand stroked through her hair gently. "For showing me what this should be, for being patient, for making me feel safe enough to try." "You never have to thank me for treating you with respect and care," Theo said firmly. "That is the bare minimum you deserve. I am honored that you trust me enough to be vulnerable with me." Their life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. Theo continued working at Silver Creek Ranch, managing their growing cattle operation. Beatrice kept her position at the school, finding fulfillment in helping the children learn and grow. In the evenings, they came together in their cabin, sharing meals and conversation, building a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. Beatrice discovered that marriage could be a source of joy rather than fear. She learned that disagreements could be resolved through calm discussion rather than violence. She found that she could express her opinions without being punished, could make mistakes without being berated, could simply exist as herself without constantly walking on eggshells. Theo showed her the mountains, teaching her to love the rugged landscape the way he did. They rode together through alpine meadows thick with wildflowers, fished in crystal-clear streams, and watched elk grazing at sunset. He pointed out animal tracks and taught her to read the weather in the clouds. He shared with her the deep connection he felt to the land, and she began to feel it too. As summer turned to autumn and then winter again, Beatrice realized she had not thought about Robert in weeks. The fear that had defined her for so long had faded to a distant memory, replaced by the steady security of knowing she was loved and valued. She no longer jumped at sudden sounds or flinched from unexpected touch. She met people's eyes when she spoke to them. She laughed freely and often. One snowy evening in February, as they sat together by the fire in their cabin, Beatrice realized she had something important to tell Theo. She had been trying to find the right moment, but there was no perfect time for this kind of news. "Theo," she said, setting aside the sock she was darning. "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the piece of leather he was working on, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. "About 3 months along, the doctor thinks." For a moment Theo just stared at her, and Beatrice felt a flutter of the old anxiety. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of pure joy. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down carefully. "We are going to have a baby," he sounded almost awed. "Beatrice, that is wonderful. When? How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" She laughed at his enthusiasm, his genuine excitement. "October, the doctor says. I am feeling well, just tired sometimes, and I need you to stop spinning me around like a child." Sorry. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his expression tender. "A baby, our baby." "I cannot believe it. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy does not begin to cover it, Theo said, pulling her close again. You have given me everything, Beatrice. A home, a family, a reason to wake up smiling every day. I could not ask for anything more. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. As Beatrice's belly swelled with their growing child, Theo became almost comically protective. He hovered constantly, insisting she rest more, carrying anything heavier than a teacup, fretting over every little discomfort. It drove her crazy even as it touched her heart. I am pregnant, not dying, she told him exasperatedly one afternoon when he insisted she sit down after she had been standing for all of 5 minutes. I just want to make sure you are all right, he protested. You and the baby are the most important things in the world to me. And we will be fine, she assured him. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Theo. I promise I will tell you if I need help. But she did not really mind his fussing, not truly. It came from a place of love and care, not control. He was worried about her well-being, not trying to restrict her autonomy. The difference was everything. In early October, as the aspen trees turned gold on the mountainsides and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Beatrice went into labor. Margaret came to help, along with the town's doctor, and Theo paced outside the cabin for hours, wearing a path in the dirt. It was a long labor, exhausting and painful, but when the baby finally arrived as the sun was setting, filling the cabin with golden light, everything else faded away. The doctor placed the infant in Beatrice's arms, and she looked down into the face of her son, overwhelmed with love so fierce it took her breath away. A boy, the doctor announced, healthy and strong. Theo was allowed in then, and he approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might break something. When he saw the baby, his eyes filled with tears. He is perfect, Theo whispered, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around Theo's finger instinctively, and Beatrice watched her husband fall completely in love. What should we name him? She asked softly. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, never quite settling on anything that felt right. But now, looking at their son, Beatrice knew exactly what his name should be. Matthew, she said. Matthew Theodore Dalton. Matthew, Theo repeated, testing the sound of it. I like it. Matthew Dalton. Welcome to the world, son. The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but Beatrice had never been happier. Theo was an involved father, getting up with her during the night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy. He sang to his son, told him stories about the mountains and the ranch, made promises about all the things they would do together when Matthew was older. Watching Theo with their child, Beatrice finally understood what a real father should be. Not distant and authoritarian, not violent and unpredictable, but present and loving. Theo was teaching their son through his actions what it meant to be a good man, and Beatrice knew Matthew would grow up secure in the knowledge that he was loved and valued. As winter settled over St. Elmo once again, their little family thrived. The cabin that had seemed plenty large enough for two felt cozy and full with three, but Beatrice loved the pleasant chaos. She loved the clutter of baby things, the sound of Matthew's cries and gurgles, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself. One evening, with Matthew finally asleep in his cradle and snow falling softly outside, Beatrice sat with Theo by the fire. He had his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth, content in a way she had never imagined possible. You remember when we first met? Theo asked quietly. You ran into me on the street and you looked so scared I thought you might faint. I remember, Beatrice said. I could barely look at you. I was terrified you would be angry about the collision. I knew then that someone had hurt you badly, Theo said. I wanted to protect you from whatever it was, even though I did not know you at all. I guess some part of me recognized that you were going to be important to me. I was so broken, Beatrice said softly. I did not think I could ever be whole again. I certainly did not think I deserved to be happy. And now, Theo asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Now I am happier than I knew was possible. You healed me, Theo. You showed me what love should be, what I deserved. You made sure I would never fear again. You healed yourself, Theo corrected gently. You found the courage to leave, to start over, to open your heart again, despite everything you had been through. I just had the privilege of being there to witness it and support you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and listening to their son's quiet breathing from across the room. Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrified woman who could not speak her husband's name to the confident mother and wife she had become. The path had not been easy, but it had led her home. I love you, she said, tilting her head to look up at Theo. I do not say it enough, but I love you more than words can express. I love you too, Theo replied, his gray eyes warm in the firelight. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that, you and Matthew are my whole world. Life continued to unfold in beautiful, mundane ways. Matthew grew from an infant to a toddler, his personality emerging bright and curious. He had Beatrice's brown hair and Theo's gray eyes, and he was fearless in the way only children who have never known violence can be. He climbed everything, explored constantly, and laughed with pure joy at the simplest things. When Matthew was 2, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less wonderful. Their daughter, Emma, was born in the spring of 1880, arriving during a thunderstorm that seemed to match her fierce personality. She was smaller than Matthew had been but louder, making her presence known from the moment she entered the world. Their little cabin grew increasingly cramped with 4 residents, and Theo began making plans to build them a larger house. Using some of the money from Robert's estate, which Beatrice had finally felt comfortable accessing now that she had completely moved beyond that part of her life, they purchased land just outside St. Elmo. Theo spent months working on the house, aided by friends from the ranch, and by the time Emma was a year old, they moved into a beautiful 2-story home with enough room for everyone. Beatrice created a garden, growing vegetables and flowers, teaching the children to nurture living things. Theo built a barn and acquired a few horses, showing Matthew how to care for the animals. Their home became a place of laughter and love, a sanctuary from the world. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and holidays, skinned knees and childhood illnesses, school plays and family dinners. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Emma was wild and adventurous, forever getting into mischief. They fought like siblings do but loved each other fiercely. Theo was promoted to foreman at Silver Creek Ranch, a position that came with more responsibility but also better pay and respect. Beatrice eventually left her position at the school to focus on raising their children, though she continued to tutor students in their home. She also began writing, penning articles about life in the mountains that were published in newspapers throughout Colorado. They built a life that was ordinary in the best possible way. There were struggles, of course. Winters were harsh at high altitude, money was sometimes tight, and they faced the same challenges any family did. But they faced them together, as partners, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating successes. In the summer of 1885, when Matthew was 7 and Emma was 5, Beatrice stood in her garden one afternoon, watching Theo teach their children to rope fence posts. He was patient with their mistakes, encouraging rather than critical, celebrating their small victories. Matthew was getting the hang of it, his throws becoming more accurate. Emma mostly just tangled herself in the rope, but she laughed every time, undeterred by failure. Margaret came to visit, as she often did, and stood beside Beatrice, following her gaze. "You have built something beautiful here," Margaret said softly. "When you showed up on my doorstep 9 years ago, I was not sure you would survive. You were so broken, so scared. Look at you now." "I had help," Beatrice said, smiling as Emma finally managed to loop the rope over a post and squealed with delight. "I could not have done it alone." "But you did the hard part," Margaret insisted. "You chose to leave. You chose to heal. You chose to love again despite every reason to keep your heart closed. That took courage I am not sure I could have mustered." Beatrice considered that. It had taken courage, though at the time it had not felt that way. It had felt like desperation, like survival instinct driving her to flee. But maybe there was courage in survival too. Maybe the bravest thing was to keep living, to keep trying, to keep believing that something better was possible. "I was so afraid for so long," Beatrice said quietly. "Afraid to speak his name, afraid to make a sound, afraid to simply exist. And then Theo showed me I did not have to live that way. He made sure I would never fear again." "He is a good man," Margaret agreed. "You both deserve this happiness." That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Beatrice found Theo on the porch, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the sunset. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How lucky I am," Theo said simply. "I have a job I enjoy, children who amaze me every day, and a wife I love more with each passing year. What more could a man want? We are the lucky ones," Beatrice corrected. "You gave me my life back, Theo. You gave me the courage to be myself, to trust again, to believe I deserved good things. I will never be able to repay that gift." "You do not owe me anything," Theo said, turning to face her. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks gently. "You gave me just as much. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just existing day to day. We saved each other, Beatrice. That is what love does." She kissed him then, pouring years of gratitude and affection into the gesture. After all this time, his touch still made her feel safe, still made her feel cherished. That had never faded, would never fade. "I used to think happiness was not meant for people like me," Beatrice admitted. "That I had made my choices and had to live with the consequences, no matter how terrible. But you taught me that it is never too late to choose differently, to want more, to demand better. You taught me that I deserve to be happy." "You always deserved it," Theo said firmly. "Long before you met me, you deserved kindness and safety and love. I am just grateful I got to be the one to give it to you." They stood together on the porch as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of their mountain home. An owl hooted in the distance, and crickets sang in the grass. Inside, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, but it contained everything that mattered. The years continued to roll by, marked by the seasons and the rhythms of family life. Matthew grew tall and serious, eventually heading to Denver for university, determined to become a lawyer. Emma remained wild and free, more interested in horses than books, dreaming of one day running her own ranch. Theo's hair began to gray at the temples, and Beatrice found laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They grew older together, their love maturing from the passionate intensity of new romance into something deeper and more enduring. They knew each other completely, could read each other's moods and thoughts with barely a word exchanged. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, and built a life together that neither would trade for anything. On their 20th wedding anniversary, in the summer of 1897, Theo surprised Beatrice with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Margaret and took the train down from the mountains, spending a week in the bustling city. They stayed in a nice hotel, went to the theater, ate in fancy restaurants, and enjoyed being simply a couple again rather than parents and ranchers and community members. One evening, as they walked along the streets of Denver after dinner, Beatrice paused outside a courthouse. She had not been to Denver since fleeing Robert over 20 years ago, and she had carefully avoided this area of the city during their visit. But now she felt drawn to stop, to confront this ghost one final time. "This is where he worked," she said quietly, looking up at the imposing stone building. "Robert, where he had his office, where he conducted his business. I used to come here sometimes, waiting for him to finish work so we could go home together. I would stand outside just like this, dreading the moment he would emerge, knowing I would spend the walk home measuring every word, trying not to provoke his anger." Theo took her hand, saying nothing, just offering his solid presence beside her. "I have not thought about him in years," Beatrice continued. "Not really. He has become like a bad dream, something that happened to a different person in a different life. But standing here, I remember what it felt like to be her. That terrified girl who thought she had no choices, no escape, and I am so grateful I am not her anymore." "You were always more than he allowed you to be," Theo said gently. "He tried to make you small, to crush your spirit, but he never succeeded. You survived him, and then you thrived without him. That is your victory, Beatrice. You won." She turned away from the courthouse and looked at her husband, this good man who had stood beside her for 2 decades, who had never wavered in his love and support. "I did win," she agreed. "I got everything I ever wanted, everything I did not dare to dream was possible. I got you." They walked back to their hotel hand in hand, leaving the past behind where it belonged. The next morning, they boarded the train back to St. Elmo, back to their home and their children and their life. As the train climbed into the mountains and Denver disappeared behind them, Beatrice felt a sense of completion, as if a final door had closed on that chapter of her life. When they arrived home, Matthew and Emma raced out to greet them, full of stories about their week with Aunt Margaret. The house was chaotic and noisy and full of life, exactly as it should be. Beatrice looked around at her family, at the home they had built together, and felt her heart overflow with contentment. That night, lying in bed beside Theo, she said softly, "Do you remember what I told you that day after I learned Robert was dead? I said his name over and over, trying to take back the power it had held over me." "I remember," Theo said, pulling her closer. "I do not think I have said it since then," Beatrice realized. "Not once in 20 years. Not because I am afraid anymore, but because he simply does not matter. He is not part of my life, not even as a memory I need to confront. He is just gone, irrelevant, powerless. And that is the greatest freedom of all." "Then he truly is gone," Theo said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You do not carry him with you anymore. You are completely free," and she was. That fear that had haunted her for so long, that had made her unable to even speak a name, had finally released its hold entirely. She was free to live, to love, to simply be herself without shadow or shame. Theo had helped her find that freedom, had walked beside her every step of the journey from terror to peace, but ultimately she had done the work herself. She had chosen to heal, chosen to trust, chosen to believe in the possibility of happiness. The years continued to pass in a sweet blur. Matthew finished university and came home to St. Elmo to practice law, setting up an office in town, and eventually marrying a kind woman named Sarah. Emma, true to her nature, convinced Theo to let her take over managing the horses at Silver Creek Ranch, proving herself more than capable despite her young age. Beatrice and Theo became grandparents, first to Matthew and Sarah's twin boys, then to Emma's daughter. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate family gatherings, and their home became the center of their growing clan. Sunday dinners became tradition, the house filled with children and laughter and love. As Beatrice moved through her 50s and then 60s, she marveled at the life she had built. She had gone from that terrified woman who arrived in St. Elmo with nothing but a carpetbag and crushing fear to this person who was grandmother, wife, mother, friend, and writer. She had published several books about life in the mountains, her work respected throughout the region. She had students she had taught who now had children of their own, a legacy of education and care. But most importantly, she had love. Deep, abiding, unconditional love that had sustained her through everything. On a warm summer evening in 1910, Beatrice and Theo sat on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still vital and engaged with life. Theo's hair was completely white and Beatrice's had gone silver, but they still held hands like newlyweds, still stole kisses when they thought no one was watching. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "Staying in St. Elmo all these years, you could have gone anywhere, done anything. But you stayed here with me." Theo looked at her with those same gray eyes that had captivated her over 30 years ago, still clear and kind. "I stayed because this is where I wanted to be, where you were, and I have never, not for one single moment, regretted that choice. You are the best decision I ever made, Beatrice Dalton." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had been their home for so long. This was what happily ever after looked like, she thought. Not perfect or without struggle, but filled with love and partnership and the quiet joy of building a life together. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times over the decades. But the words never lost their meaning, never became rote or empty. Each time she said them, she meant them with her whole heart. "I love you too," Theo replied, as he always did. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." Their grandchildren's laughter rang out across the yard, pure and bright, and Beatrice thought about the legacy they were leaving. Not wealth or fame, but something more valuable. They were teaching the next generation what love should look like, how families should support each other, how to build lives based on respect and kindness rather than fear and control. The little girl who had been too scared to say her husband's name aloud was long gone, replaced by this woman who spoke freely and lived boldly and loved without reservation. The cowboy who had vowed to make sure she never feared again had kept his promise, not through grand gestures but through daily acts of love and respect that accumulated into a lifetime of happiness. As darkness fell and the stars emerged over the mountains, Beatrice reflected on her journey. From that terrified flight from Denver to this peaceful evening surrounded by family, she had traveled further than miles could measure. She had found herself, found her voice, found her strength, and she had found a love that had healed her broken places and shown her who she was always meant to be. The crickets began their evening song, and inside the house, someone lit lamps that glowed warm and welcoming through the windows. The grandchildren were called in for baths and bedtime stories, and eventually it was just Beatrice and Theo on the porch, as it had been so many evenings before. "Ready to go inside?" Theo asked, standing and offering his hand. Beatrice took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They walked into their home together, surrounded by the evidence of their life, photographs and children's drawings, well-worn furniture and books read and reread. This was what they had built together. This was what freedom looked like. That night, Curled up beside her husband in the bed they had shared for decades, Beatrice fell asleep with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. She had survived darkness and found light. She had known fear and discovered courage. She had been broken and become whole, and she had loved and been loved in return, completely and unconditionally for the rest of her days. The cowboy had made sure she would never fear again, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift imaginable: a life worth living, filled with joy and purpose and love that endured through all the years and all the challenges, never wavering, never fading, constant as the mountains that surrounded their home. She was free, she was loved, she was home, and that was the happiest ending she could have ever imagined.